Hello and welcome to Occupied Thoughts, a podcast brought to you by the Foundation for Middle East Peace. My name is Ahmed Moor and I'm a fellow at the Foundation. Today is November 28th, 2025, and I'm very glad to be here with Peter Beinart, who's also a fellow at FMEP, professor at City University, editor at large at Jewish Currents, and a lot of other things. Today, Peter, we're having a discussion, which I think may be a difficult one, but a much needed one. And I want to start off just by, saying I'm glad to be able to have it with you, and I'm, as always, grateful to you for your candor and openness. So you just arrived from Tel Aviv.
Yeah,
We're talking today about your decision to speak at Tel Aviv University.
yeah.
The first question is really just kind of what happened.
Yeah, I've been just like just going over that in my mind again and again and again over the last few days. I mean, I think what happened was this. I hadn't been to Palestine, Israel, since the October 7th massacre and the subsequent genocides. And I have been spending a lot of time speaking to Jews in the United States and other places. And I feel kind of like that's what I do best. I feel like that's kind of my little lane. And it's very meaningful work to me. I don't know how much it matters, but it's kind of meaningful to me. And I hope that I change their minds. And I've been watching what's happening. I've been watching what's happening with Israel in Israel, like a lot of people, with just overwhelming horror, not just the genocide, but the widespread support for it in Israeli society. And I felt like I wanted a chance to talk to Israelis. I wanted to better understand this, but I also really wanted to say certain things to them about why I thought Jewish supremacy was fundamentally wrong, that it was a desecration of Judaism's highest principles, that was not in the interest of Jewish safety, and that it has led now to this, that this needs to be like fundamentally a reckoning with the whole idea of Jewish supremacy. And so the idea of, this opportunity came along to speak at Tel Aviv University. And, I do support, and I've been pretty open about supporting a lot of forms of sanction and boycotts, military aid, trade deals, FIFA, Eurovision. But I felt like, well, this could be an exception because I'm going to speak to try to change their minds. And I think that the critical mistake that I made, the critical mistake was just like a basic mistake about how one conducts one's behavior in so many aspects of life, which is like I didn't listen to people. I think perhaps because I wanted to do it so much, I just kind of like didn't turn to people who, like you, people who like I've known for a long time, Palestinians who've taught me so much. I mean, so much of what I believe now has been because of listening to Palestinians. And yet I just basically threw that basic principle out the window because I really, really wanted to do this. And it was really, really maybe I didn't want to be persuaded not to go. And it was really arrogant and intellectually shoddy. And I mean, I think it's important to say that like everyone, including myself, does have the right to make their own decisions about things, but the decisions have to be made after carefully listening to points of view. Different points of view, especially when you're in a position where you are the one who's part of the group that has legal supremacy, and it's the other people who you're listening to are the people who are suffering from that legal supremacy and genocide, especially in that case. And I just basically did not follow that principle, and I think because I didn't, things that are basically kind of should have been obvious were not obvious to me. And I'll just quickly go through a couple of them. Maybe we'll talk about them. But one of them was the impact this would have on on boycotts in the future. That it wasn't just about me wanting to have my moment to say these things, but it would have an impact on other people's decisions. The second was about the reasons that Tel Aviv University particularly was being boycotted. That if its particular role in complicity in what Israel has done to the Palestinian people. And the third is just that there were other opportunities for me to talk to Israelis. It's not like that not going to Tel Aviv University didn't mean that I couldn't ever try to make my case to Israelis and talk to them, that there were ways of doing that that wouldn't have undermined these BDS guidelines. And so this has been painful partly because it's just been a self-inflicted, and but I just try to remind myself that I live it's nothing compared to what Palestinians go through. It's nothing compared to what a lot of people in America go through. I have enormous unearned privilege and safety and security in my life, and I need to do my best to learn from this and grow because I've made big mistakes in the past, and I feel like there's no other way to do them, but to deal with them, but to like try to acknowledge them and learn from them. So that's kind of where I am.
I think ultimately we all we're all important. You particularly have a role that you've played in the solidarity movement, and it's been a very important role. Um, but at the end of the day, we're none of us is there was somebody who said once at Harvard, he kind of said, I look out at the cemetery and I see a lot of people who believe they were indispensable.
Yeah,
So none of us is indispensable, and maybe, we can reduce the temperature around the conversation by just saying, okay, we're all human beings, we all make mistakes, we're all ultimately cogs in something which is bigger than we are.
yes,
And you matter, and the decision that you made matters for all the reasons that you said, but ultimately none of us is indispensable, and that's a way of
100%,
hopefully reducing the temperature around all of this.
100%.
But having said that, my challenge with the language about today it's described as centering Palestinians. Centering is a verb,
Yeah, yeah,
um, and observing the picket line. So I love the BDS movement. I love Omar Barghouti and Pakbi, and I have tremendous respect for those guys. Um, they don't take as hard a line as I do on some stuff. So their goals are fairly modest in the
Mhm.
scheme of things. I'll get to them in a moment. Me personally, I meet Israelis and I want to see the vaccine card. I want to know that you've been inoculated against genocide, but I also want to know what you were doing in 1982. I want to know what you were doing in the First Intifada. Did you follow Rabin's edict and break their bones, or didn't you? What were you, for men of my age, what were you doing during the Second Intifada and then cast lead? I'd like a clean bill of health across the board. Damn the institutions. I'm right there with the BDS movement, but I want to also know about individual perpetrators. So it's not as though the BDS line is kind of one that I observe unthinkingly. I take that probably a harder line than the BDS movement. I think I'm different than other people in that way, and I'm willing to acknowledge that. So the question just goes to, like, assume BDS had never existed.
Yeah,
As a humane, ethically oriented, and thinking person,
yeah,
how do you justify engaging with people who have killed more than 20,000 children, who have institutionalized rape, Peter, who just yesterday executed in full view of somebody who's recording two young unarmed men. And again, that's a matter of state policy. We're not talking about errant police somewhere in the American heartland. So how do you forget
yeah,
BDS?
yeah,
How do you
yeah,
personally
yeah.
make that assessment and decision?
It's a really difficult and important question. I feel like, and I don't think it's not unique to Israel because there are lots of other times and places and societies where people are in a society where evil has been normalized, and I've thought about over the past couple of years, like how Germans, dealt with, Germans who, let's say, weren't in Nazi Germany, how they thought about their family, their society, or Southerners in the United States during slavery and segregation. I'm not sure I have a clear answer to it. I think that it may be that and maybe this is questionable. I'm not saying that all Jews would feel this way. Jews are not monolithic. I think for me, is all Jews, there is a quasi-familial element in Jewish tradition in the way I was raised. So I see this as a genocide being committed by people to whom I have a very strong connection, even though I don't know them, but that we are a people who imagine ourselves as a kind of as a kind of family. And so I feel like this means, I think for me somehow, some responsibility to challenge and speak to them rather than just saying, I'm writing you off. Now, that doesn't answer a lot of really difficult questions about how and when and at what cost and what the cost benefit it is. And I think this was a really good example of me not thinking through those questions in a thoughtful way at all. And I have to do that in a much better way. But I think that Israeli society, one of the things that's happened is Israeli society has walled itself off from reality self-consciously. It's not that the reality is not there to see. It's very easy to see, but Israeli Jews don't want to see it. They have decided they either justify it and say it's fine, or they pretend that it doesn't exist, or some combination in between. And there's some need to puncture that. And I'm not suggesting by any means that just having conversations and basically, I mean, I should never have given that talk at Tel Aviv University. I started the talk by giving a series of stories from Gaza that I have heard myself and asking the question of why it is that that the population in Gaza, who are mostly refugees, don't have the right to return to the places from which they're from, when Israel gives the Jews the right. And those are the things I think I would like to believe that there can be some role for interactions, challenging conversations like that in a context of pressure. I'm not saying by any means that it would work without pressure, but that there can be a combination of pressure and of speaking that together can produce a change in the way that we saw a change that happened among the elite in white South Africa, where people realized that apartheid needed to be rethought for their own self-interest, or white Southerners. So I think that's my way of thinking about it, but I'm still trying to figure it out.
Right. And that, that sounds fair. Um, I, of course, I can relate on the other side.
Yes, yes, yes,
There were people on the Hamas side, on the Palestinian side, people in Hamas who committed war crimes on October 7th. And I can tell you they committed horrible war crimes. I don't view them in the same way as I view Israeli soldiers. And obviously there are power asymmetries, but all of that aside, if you normalize all of that, or rather, if you reset all of that such that none of it exists, all things held equal, I think I would still view the Palestinian militants who committed war crimes differently. And maybe that is the essential tribalism that all of us contend with. Um,
Although I mean, there's also, I'm not telling you anything, there's also the question about war crimes committed by people under oppression and war crimes committed by people who are maintaining oppression. I think they're all war crimes. I think they're all wrong, right? But I do think, I don't think it's wrong to understand context, not to excuse war crimes, but to understand the circumstances from which they come.
I agree completely. I'm really talking about the emotional valence. If all
Yes,
things held equal, my commitment to those young men in Palestine, all things held equal, I have a higher emotional connection or a more salient emotional connection there.
yeah,
Um, on the question of the value of boycott, well, I guess just to be thorough here, I wanted to read part of the PACB statement,
yes, yes,
um, and I want to be very clear. You're not Kevin Roberts, and this is not the Heritage Foundation, and this is not a struggle set. We're having this conversation because I
yes,
regard myself as your friend, and I'm genuinely interested in how you made the decision, and that I think should be the frame for the whole discussion.
yes,
So,
yes,
but to be clear about the PACB statement, so why is Tel Aviv University worth boycotting based on these very limited goals that the BDS movement has? Tel Aviv University, I'm reading now, is deeply complicit in enabling and trying to whitewash Israel's U.S. armed and funded genocide, as well as its decades-old regime of settler colonialism, military occupation, and apartheid that has developed, and this is documented, many weapons systems used by Israel in committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, and now genocide against Palestinians. Tel Aviv University's venture capital firm, TAU Ventures, boasts of investing in Extend, which provides systems to deploy, quote, swarms of armed drones that have been used in the Gaza genocide. And this is viscerally an evocative point for me. We've all seen those drone videos, and that comes out of a so-called academic institution. That's not the academy. That's just high tech business. But I just wanted to read that to help explain
yeah, yeah,
for
yeah,
listeners why the BDS movement is targeted Tel Aviv University. So, excuse me. We've gone through what's happened in the past. You made the apology. I am grateful for the apology. It's meaningful to me. Not everybody received it that way. I was texting with a friend who put it really well. She said, if you can't take an apology seriously, you're stuck. Why would anybody reconsider their position?
mm,
And I agree with that.
mm,
And in my own life, and I invite listeners to also think about this, as a man in his 40s, I said some really hurtful and terrible things about gay people when I was in college 20 years ago and after college.
mm,
The culture shifted dramatically around that, and a lot of us have had an opportunity to experience our shame in private, and we haven't had to contend with it in a public way. But I would be skeptical of anybody who said that on that particular issue, homophobia, they didn't have something to be apologetic about and to apologize for. So we have to acknowledge that people grow, that you're able to learn, and that we do it together. But not everybody took it that way. And the stakes are high here because of how
Yeah,
prominent you are and because of the role that you played. And so I'm going to read a tweet that Ali Abu Na'ma
yeah, yeah,
shared.
yeah,
Ali is a prominent Palestinian American, Palestinian Jordanian American activist who runs Electronic Intifada. And he wrote, quote, "It was indeed a serious mistake and one Peter Beinart really has no excuse for. He's been engaging in debate about the BDS movement for more than a decade, and he knows all the arguments, and he has heard from Palestinians for years, and up to the moment of his visit of the genocide capital, and he nonetheless arrogantly chose to ignore them. It's hard not to see this as anything other than an exercise in damage control to restore his marketability following the overwhelming backlash to his informed, conscious, willful decision to violate a clear picket line." So I read that Ali sometimes uses more strident language than I would, but the substance of what he's saying
yeah.
should be addressed. I mean, what do you
Yeah.
think?
Absolutely. I mean, I guess a couple things. I mean, in Judaism, the idea of Maimonides, like famously came out with this principle in Judaism that an apology is a necessary step, but that the you only truly know someone has repented when they're put in the same situation and they act differently. Like that's the acid test, right? So the question is really how I behave in the future, I think. I mean, at least from in my tradition. So if you apologize and you do the same thing that you were doing before, then the apology is completely worthless. On the question of like motives, I mean, I guess I'm not a I'm not a saint. I don't think I can claim as anyone that I'm not responsive to fears about how people see me and all these things. But I would just say Ali Abunimah doesn't know me personally, doesn't have a relationship with me, and I think I think if you talk to people to Palestinians and other folks who know me personally and have spent time with me over the years, that they would say that I'm a sincere person, and that and I'm not asking for anyone to pat me on the back or anything like this at all. Again, I live a life of immense and unearned privilege. But if I were only interested in what the easiest thing for me to do would be professionally and socially and culturally, given that I live in a pretty religious Jewish community, and given various incentive systems that exist in American media, I'm not sure this is the path that I would have chosen. Um, and frankly, even now, I mean, yeah, it's true. I paid a price, huge price for for doing this, and and there are also people, there are also people who won't don't like me because I've apologized. I mean, there's another group of people. So it's, I think that I thought a lot about the conversation that you and I had already talked about having a conversation before I apologized. And I thought a lot about the conversation that we were going to have because I thought to myself, if I'm, and it was part of a lot of conversations that I had, if I'm not going to apologize and I'm going to restate my position, I have to be able to make an argument that I think is convincing. And I don't think I could. I mean, I think that that was a big part of the reason that I did this, and I didn't know exactly how it would shake out exactly. But so anyway, Ali is welcome to whatever views he holds, and people can have, in public. I would just say that I think that people who know me personally, I think in general might be inclined to take a less harsh view.
Yeah, and I can attest to what you said as somebody who's known you for a long time that you are a sincere person who's operated in good faith.
Mm,
And we've had disagreements in the past, and this has been one of them.
yeah,
Um, but but that for me is a critical point as well in assessing and evaluating an apology. But now we're getting to I've got to ask you a question. I mean, are you
yeah.
a hostage to the Palestine solidarity movement? I mean, blink twice if you need.
Yeah, I mean, right. So that's another thing I've been thinking about, and I'm going to try to think more about. I mean, look, you just said yourself that you you don't agree with the BDS movement on everything. You would actually go further than them. And I have had conversations with Palestinians over the years, not nearly as many as you have, but plenty of conversations in which Palestinian friends of mine who are not moderates have said, I think the BDS movement made a mistake here. I think they're too rigid here, blah, blah, blah. And I've heard from Palestinians, friends and others since the apology telling me they think I was wrong, not tons, but a couple. So I think that I think that it is, I think people have to have the right to make their own decisions ultimately as individuals, especially when they're writers. A writer has to speak their own truth. So to me, no, I don't think that I or anyone should be put in a position where they're going to say, I'm going to abandon from now on all future critical judgment about things. I wrote about the conversation about no other land, for instance, with PACB, and I haven't apologized for that because I didn't and I didn't think that the criticism made sense from my from my limited perspective.
For what
I
it's
think that
worth, I agree with that. That was a point of departure for me as well from the BDS framework. I didn't think no other land was worthy of disruption.
yeah. So I think that the to me the line that I will try to walk is to listen carefully with humility to people to a range of Palestinians when questions like this come up. That ultimately I have to be the one to make the decision, but I will make the decision after having being humble enough to listen carefully to people who know a lot of things that I don't know because they've had a lot of experiences that I haven't had.
Right. And I think we all owe that to ourselves. Right? I mean, and nobody wants to be, or rather, I don't want to be in solidarity or working alongside people who follow edicts unthinkingly. And I don't think that's what the role of the BDS movement plays. I
Mhm.
think there's very much an invitation to engagement by Omar Barghouti, by PACB. It's very much an ongoing conversation in Palestinian spaces and I think solidarity spaces generally. But the unthinking soldier, I think, doesn't provide a benefit to anybody, and that's just not my orientation in the world.
Absolutely.
You've been savaged by liberal Zionists online. I think that the right wing hates you no matter what.
Mm.
But Fania, I may be mispronouncing her name, but Fania Salzberger,
Mm.
Amos Oz's
Yeah,
daughter.
yeah, yeah,
Her father did a lot for liberal Zionism, and I don't want to distract from the basic conversation we're having,
yeah.
but I don't have a lot of warmth in relation to kind of liberal Zionist
Mm.
literature.
Mm.
But anyway, so Fania Salzberger, a liberal Zionist in the Israeli context, wrote about you,
Mm.
groveling, self-flagellating, confessing to the Grand Inquisitors, oozing cult-like repentance, licking the trendsetter's boots, loving the Big Brother. The present era has not only destroyed lives, it is also ruining personalities and nurturing abject cowardice.
Mm.
Um, so you've put the liberal Zionists in a tough spot,
Mm.
and there's been the lash, the backlash, and now you're being lashed again. How do you
Mm.
respond to the liberal Zionists?
Well, I mean, look, I want to say I know people. Different people are differently situated. There are people who teach at Tel Aviv University who I know who have dedicated much of their lives to opposing the occupation and opposing apartheid, and actually who have an analysis of Israel-Palestine that's probably not too different than the analysis that you have and that I have, and they're differently situated. We sit in different places, and I my views about liberal Zionism are something I've written a lot about, right? I mean, I used to be a liberal Zionist. 5 years ago, I wrote an essay arguing that I thought that these principles were in basic contradiction. Principle of a state that gives legal privileges to one group over another, and the principle of equality under the law, which is the foundation of liberal democracy, in my view. So to me, that's been a point that I've made, for many, many, many years now. In terms of the ideas that I've, again, to go back to this idea that I've just kind of sold my soul and I'm kind of, bending to the, there will be times in the future, I think, where I will say other things that people on the left or whatever disagree with. I mean, to go to what you said, it is important I'm not, this was me apologizing about a particular decision that I made that I don't think I can defend well when challenged by smart, thoughtful people. And so why would I want to go out and basically and try and defend a position that I don't think I can defend well? In the future, there may well be decisions that I come to that I think I can defend well, and that will be different than some people on the left on Israel Palestine or good knows what. And I think I will take those positions because to me, ultimately, what it means to be, I don't want to make myself seem this sound too highfalutin, but like you and I are both writers to some degree. I think the fundamental thing about writing well is you have to believe what you're saying, right? You can't write well. You can be so super wrong, but if you lose faith in what you're saying and you still keep writing, that's when you're really in trouble. And so if I come to conclusions that put me in disagreements with people who are to my left on Israel and Palestine in the future, I will talk to people and I will go through a process of thinking it through. But if I come to the end at the end of the day that this is what I really believe and I can defend it, I'll say that.
Yeah. And that's as much as anybody can say. Yeah, I again I appreciate the independence. I feel strongly this was a wrong decision. I think obviously you've arrived at that conclusion
Yeah.
very quickly. And what can we do but go forward and have honest conversations with one another? There is a question about boycott, and I think one of the possible differences between us as well, and I know you're speaking with Zaki Ahmed, who is
Yes.
big in the South Africa liberation
Yeah.
movement. Is boycott primarily or solely a means to an end,
Yeah.
or is there value in punishment as such?
Mm, mm.
When I think of Jeffrey Epstein in Rikers
Mm.
Island, wherever he was
Yeah.
and where he died, was that about rehabilitating Jeffrey Epstein, or was that about requiring him to pay for bad things that he's done?
Hmm. Hmm.
And when I think about boycott in relation to the 6% of Jewish Israelis, so I think over 500,000 people have
Yeah.
directly participated in the genocide. For me, it's not just about like I have no hope of rehabilitating these people.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's about extracting some cost for
Hmm.
bad behavior.
Hmm.
How do you think about it?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I do believe that in any society where there have been grave crimes that have committed, it seems to me, including America's, like you need to move towards the principle of equality under the law, and then there has to be historical justice. There has to be a reckoning with what's done in the past, and there has to be a whole range of ways of kind of reparations for that. I mean, part of the reason I think we're where we are in the United States is precisely because the people like Ta-Nehisi Coates and others who were basically saying like our unwillingness to face the past is a loaded gun that's sitting here for someone to pick up. I think that's true in a post-apartheid South Africa. I think it's true everywhere. And so, yes, I totally believe in the idea of reparations, which are in a way asking people to pay for the things they've done in the past. Whether that's the way we should think about boycotts now, or whether we think about that as something in the future that comes out of a process of truth and reconciliation and historical justice, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, again, boycotts are a little bit different than the Jeffrey Epstein thing in that they're not necessarily only targeting one person, right? They're targeting entire societies and kind of institutions, including people like Palestinian students at Tel Aviv University who are not responsible for these things, right? So I'm not sure I think the analogy entirely works to an individual punishment, but I do believe that there has to be there has to be payment by the state and the society as compensation as a way of getting towards justice and healing. You never get complete justice and healing, but I think the more of that happens, the more justice and healing you get.
Okay, I've got now a question about a question, an observation, a degree of skepticism about
Yeah,
the idea of communicating with Israelis in
yeah,
order to affect the liberation of Palestinians
yeah,
first, then everybody.
yeah,
The idea that Israelis don't know is a trope that, and you may even disagree with the use of the word
yeah,
trope, or so our
yeah,
listener might,
yeah.
but that emerges repeatedly in writing about
Right,
Israelis, the genocide. They
right,
don't know.
right.
Um, but I read that and I want to call bullshit. Like
Mhm, mhm.
they're the ones who are doing it. How can they
Right,
possibly not know? I'm the guy who kicked the dog. How could I not know that I've done that?
right, right.
And dog is the appropriate analogy. That's the way they treat Palestinians. So. how can Israelis not know, or am I misunderstanding the argument? And I bring this,
Yeah.
I think it was one of the essential arguments for engaging with Tel Aviv University.
I think that my sense of this, and again, there are people in Israel who I think have a more sophisticated understanding of this, is that there are individual perpetrators, yes, who are actually there when the killing happens, right? And I don't know what exactly psychological mechanisms they go through in order to not deal with that or whatever. And again, this is also bound up as you were suggesting with like profound levels of dehumanization and racism towards people. I also think there are other people in society who simply don't want to know. They don't know because they don't want to know, right? Which is, I think, something that happens in every society to some degree or another. I mean, in the United States, if I'm honest with myself, there are lots of things that I don't know because I don't want to know them. I mean, how much do I really know about the American prison system, right? I could go and read lots of reports about how horrifying. I mean, I think it's horrifying, but I could confront it, or you know, slaughterhouses. I mean, this is a universal tendency. It's been taken to an extreme because there's a genocide that's been committed. So I don't. I think that people make a decision to not want to know certain things because it's convenient for them to not know those things. Um, and I don't think that I have as well worked out a theory of this as I would like to, but when I try to think about other situations where systems of profound justice have been challenged somewhat successfully, it seems to me there is some kind of combination of of a militant and fierce pressure, but also a kind of a speaking to the population that um, that um, that offers people a vision of a different way. Um, and that I think that the ANC was able to do that very effectively in South Africa. And so I think that, and that is obviously primarily going to be done by the Palestinian national movement. But I also think there's a role for Jews as well. One of the things American Jews can say to Israelis is, we in the United States you're worried about it being, you Israelis keep saying that if you're a minority in an Arab country, your lives are going to be threatened. Well, we American Jews live as 2% of the population in a Christian country, and we're safer than you are because we've put our faith in the principle of equality under the law. That your belief that equality equals death is a product of the supremacy that you have become so accustomed to. And but we can see actually in our society, American Jews, when we look at America, not when we look at Israel, we can see actually that equality is safer for everybody. And so that there may be things that we can see. That's what I would like to believe. And I want to try to continue to do that work, but again, not in a way that leads me to be undermining a nonviolent movement that's speaking in the language of human rights and international law.
I want to switch to the topic of harm.
Yeah,
Excuse me. We talked about the harm to the Palestinians
yeah.
that kind of breaking the boycott or not observing the boycott causes. But the Palestinians aren't the only ones who are harmed here.
Mhm.
You're again a prominent person who's been on a journey in a very
Mhm.
public way and have gained a lot of credibility and a lot of people admire you for that for the honesty with which you've undertaken the journey. Um, a friend texted me about the decision and said, "This sucks because it makes it look like all the anti-Zionist Jews are one speaking invitation away from selling out, which isn't fair."
Mhm.
So, is there an element of this apology that needs to be directed at the anti-Zionist
Mhm. Mhm.
Jews within the and
Mhm.
look at me, I'm
Yeah,
censoring Jewish stuff.
yeah. Mhm.
But at the anti-Zionist Jews in the Solidarity movement who are like, Peter, why?
I mean, I think I need to apologize because I did it was wrong. I don't think that what I did should be any reflection on anybody else who's Jewish, who's an anti-Zionist. I think those people are individuals. And I don't think it's fair to suggest that because I did this, it means anybody else necessarily would. This was my individual failing. And I don't think I hope other people are not thinking that about other people because again, they are not responsible for my behavior. And I don't think just, as just because people are Jewish doesn't mean that they operate there. We're all individuals. And so I think that it would be unfair for people to kind of see what I did and basically then then change their view of other people who haven't done what I did.
That's what it's just one more version of
Yeah,
why people are mad at you.
yeah, 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 yeah,
Um, my last question, I wasn't going to talk about this because it is besides the point for
yeah,
me,
yeah.
but how was the reception at Tel Aviv University? I'm interested now. Well, what did these young
I mean,
people who had just, because to go to university
yeah,
in Israel,
yeah,
you've already
yeah,
done military
yeah,
service.
yeah,
They've
yeah,
already
yeah,
participated.
yeah.
So what are they, how
I
was
mean,
it?
there was a range. I mean, there was a lot of thoughts that it would be disrupted. There was a lot of concerns because there was a lot of anxieties about it being disrupted and not being able to, that didn't happen. People there had a range of views. I mean, there were some people who views were probably not that radically different than mine. Maybe they went because they, felt like they wanted to hear someone who had views that were very on the, on the extreme left by Israeli standards. There were other people who, who strongly, strongly disagreed, and I ended up having a long set of conversations with a group of students, and about settler colonialism, about apartheid, about anti-Semitism, about all of these things. And I think this was a mistake. I, but my work is, and I don't want to make my work into more than it is, but my work is to find other ways of having those conversations, because in ways that respect this nonviolent movement based on human rights and international law. Because when I look at those young people, whether they're American or Israeli, I think a lot depends on the trajectory of their lives. I mean, I meet young people and I think in America, I think this person could become Barry Weiss or they become Simone Zimmerman, right? And often those things happen. There's a lot of fluidity among people when they're particularly young and they're thinking about, reconsidering things and they're open to new things. And for Israelis, I mean, they could be the person who, is pressing the button to blow up the building. Or they could become part of the tiny minority of people who refuse military service or who, and so I feel like that work is really important to me. And I would, but I need to find a way of having those conversations in a way that doesn't do the damage that I did.
Thanks, Peter. Any final thoughts you want to add before it's a holiday weekend. You've just got off a flight. I don't want to hold you too long.
Uh, no, I just wanted to say thank you for doing this conversation. And, it means a lot to me that we were able to have it. And yeah, and I'm hopefully I will be able to continue a process of learning. And I'm not asking people to forgive me. Everyone has to can make their own decisions about that. That's not in my control. All that's in my control is to try to basically do things that in the future that I think will be ethical, and hopefully other people will see it that way too.
And again, I'm grateful to you because it's so hard to live a life of consistency and ethical growth. And I see you strive to do your best. And I happen to have been born on what I regard as the right side of the argument.
Mm.
So I think I've had to take fewer risks than others over time. But grateful to you for this conversation and again for all the work that you do.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you very much.